Picture the family portrait, 1976. Dad is wearing a leisure suit the color of split pea soup. Mom has on platform shoes so tall she is leaning slightly to the left. And you are right there in the middle, grinning, in a polyester shirt with a collar wide enough to land a small aircraft. Nobody in that photo thought anything was wrong. That was the problem with the 1970s. Everything felt completely normal while it was happening. Number 18 on this list turned living rooms into something that belonged in a motel lobby. And number 7 was an entire subculture that your parents hoped you would never ask about. So hit subscribe, because here are 25 embarrassing 1970s fads that everyone wants to forget. Number 25. Clackers. 2 heavy acrylic balls on a string, connected by a ring you held between your fingers. The idea was to swing them up and down until they clacked together at the top and bottom in a steady rhythm. The sound carried across the entire schoolyard, a sharp, relentless crack that teachers could hear from inside the building. The balls shattered. That was the problem nobody talked about until it was too late. A hard enough swing sent pieces of acrylic flying in every direction. Kids showed up to class with welts on their forearms and bruised knuckles. Some schools banned them outright. The Consumer Product Safety Commission eventually pulled certain versions off shelves. For about 2 years in the early 1970s, every kid in America wanted a pair, and every parent regretted buying one within a week. Number 24. Puka shell necklaces. The shells were small, white, and naturally rounded by the ocean. A strand of them around your neck was supposed to say that you surfed, or that you wished you surfed, or at the very least that you had been within driving distance of a beach at some point in your life. By the mid-1970s, puka shells were everywhere. Landlocked teenagers in Ohio wore them to the mall. Dads wore them with open-collar shirts to backyard barbecues. The shells clattered softly against your chest when you moved, and if the string broke, which it always did, you spent 10 minutes on your hands and knees picking tiny white discs out of the carpet. The fad faded by the end of the decade, then came back in the 1990s just long enough to embarrass a second generation. Number 23. Hot pants. They were exactly what the name suggests. Shorts cut so high and so tight that sitting down in them required a strategy. They showed up in fashion magazines around 1971, and within a year, women were wearing them to the office, to restaurants, and to church, which caused the kind of arguments that families did not recover from quickly. The fabric ranged from denim to velvet to sequin satin, depending on how serious you were about making an entrance. Airlines put flight attendants in them. Department stores had entire sections dedicated to them. The look peaked fast and crashed faster. By 1974, hot pants had migrated to the back of the closet, right behind the go-go boots, and most people pretended they had never owned a pair. Number 22. Pet rocks. In the fall of 1975, a man named Gary Dahl sat in a bar listening to his friends complain about their pets. The mess, the feeding, the vet bills. He went home and came up with the pet rock. It was a smooth gray stone from a beach in Mexico, packed inside a cardboard carrying case with air holes punched in the lid. The box came with a training manual that included instructions on how to teach your rock to sit, stay, and roll over. Sit and stay, obviously, it had already mastered. Americans bought them by the millions. At about $4 each, the pet rock became the must-have gift of the 1975 holiday season. People wrapped them, gave them names, set them on their desks at work. Entire office floors had a rock sitting next to the phone. The joke was so simple it barely qualified as a product, and that was the whole appeal. You were buying a punchline. By February 1976, it was over. The fad burned through the country in about 6 months. The leftover rocks went into junk drawers, garage sale boxes, and landfills. Dahl became a millionaire. Everyone who bought one became the owner of a stone they had voluntarily paid for, which is a sentence nobody should ever have to explain to their grandchildren. Number 21. Avocado green appliances. The refrigerator was green. The stove was green, the dishwasher was green, and it was not a quiet, tasteful green. It was the exact shade of a ripe avocado, slightly yellow, slightly gray, and somehow always a little greasy-looking even when it was spotless. General Electric, Frigidaire, Whirlpool, every major manufacturer offered it. Matching your entire kitchen in avocado was considered sophisticated. Builders put it in new homes as a selling point. You would walk into a model home and the whole kitchen glowed that same dull green from floor to ceiling. The color peaked around 1974, hung on through the rest of the decade, and then spent the next 40 years being torn out during every kitchen renovation. A house listing that mentions original avocado appliances today is either a teardown or a time capsule. Number 20. Waterbeds. You filled a vinyl bladder with water, set it on a heavy wooden frame, and called it a bed. The reality was something else. Getting into a waterbed was fine. Getting out was the event. Every time you moved, the water moved with you. Rolling over sent a slow wave across the entire surface that took a full 10 seconds to settle. If two people shared the bed, one person shifting at 3 in the morning could send the other person bobbing for half a minute. The heater underneath kept the water warm, but if you forgot to plug it in, you climbed into something that felt like a cold lake in November. Leaks were common. A single puncture could send gallons of water into the floor, through the ceiling, and into the apartment below. Filling one took a garden hose run through the hallway. Draining one was worse. By the late 1980s, most landlords had stopped allowing them entirely. Number 19. Macrame. This is where 1970s interior design lost all sense of proportion. Macrame was the art of knotting rope or cord into decorative patterns, and for about a decade, Americans knotted everything in sight. Plant hangers were the gateway, a braided rope cradle holding a Boston fern in a clay pot, swinging gently from a ceiling hook. That part was harmless enough. But then, the knotting spread to every surface in the house. People made macrame wall hangings the size of bed sheets. They made macrame owls with wooden bead eyes and hung them over the sofa. They made macrame belts, macrame purses, macrame vests, macrame lampshades. Craft stores could not keep the cord in stock. Pattern books sold by the millions. The owl was the signature piece. It hung in kitchens, in hallways, in bathrooms, staring down at you with those blank wooden eyes while you brushed your teeth. Some families had 4 or 5 of them stationed around the house like sentries. There was a stretch in the mid-1970s when walking into a home without at least one macrame owl felt like walking into a home where something was missing. The problem was that all of it collected dust like nothing else in the house. Those knotted fibers trapped every particle that drifted through the air. Within a year, a white wall hanging had turned a dingy gray. Cleaning it meant soaking the entire thing in a bathtub and hoping it would hold its shape when it dried, which it almost never did. The wet cord smelled like a damp basement, and the knots loosened so the whole piece sagged. By the early 1980s, the owls started coming down. The plant hangers followed. The craft cord collected dust of its own in the back of a closet. Today, macrame has made a quiet comeback in home decor, but nobody is making the owls. That chapter is closed. Number 18. Black light posters. The poster itself looked muddy and dull under normal light, but screw in a purple ultraviolet bulb, kill the overhead, and the whole thing came alive. Fluorescent oranges, electric greens, deep magentas, all glowing against a black background like something out of a fever dream. The subjects were predictable: mushrooms, wizards, eyeballs, skulls, and the occasional wolf howling at a neon moon. Every teenager in America had at least one tacked to the bedroom wall with pushpins. The black light itself gave the room a strange purple haze that made your teeth glow and your white t-shirt look radioactive. The posters faded fast. Sunlight killed the fluorescent dyes within a few months, and once they stopped glowing, they were just dark, smudgy pictures of mushrooms that nobody wanted to look at anymore. Number 17. Shag carpeting. At some point in the early 1970s, Americans decided that the floor needed to look like a Muppet. shag carpet came in every color that should never exist on a floor: burnt orange, avocado green, deep chocolate brown, and a gold that looked like mustard left in the sun. The pile stood 2 to 3 inches tall. Walking on it felt like wading through a textile swamp. Every living room had it, every den. Some people put it in the bathroom, which was a decision that became horrifying the first time someone missed the toilet at 3 in the morning. Vacuuming shag carpet was a full cardiovascular workout. The vacuum fought you the entire way, choking on the long fibers, stalling out, overheating until the motor smelled like burning rubber. And it never actually got clean. Crumbs, coins, pen caps, and dog hair sank to the bottom of the pile and stayed there for years. You could lose a set of car keys in a shag carpet and not find them until the carpet got ripped out a decade later. By the mid-1980s, homeowners were tearing it up and discovering hardwood floors underneath that had been buried since Nixon was in office. The shag went to the curb in heavy, dusty rolls, and nobody mourned it. Number 16. Jell-O salads. The 1970s had a relationship with gelatin that future generations will never fully understand. Jell-O was not dessert, it was architecture. American homemakers suspended entire meals inside translucent, quivering molds and called them salads. Lime Jell-O with shredded carrots and cottage cheese, orange Jell-O with canned mandarin segments and miniature marshmallows, strawberry Jell-O with cream cheese and crushed pineapple shaped like a ring and served on a bed of iceberg lettuce. Every potluck, every church supper, every holiday dinner had at least 2 of them on the table, jiggling gently whenever someone walked past. Your mother spent the night before carefully layering the mold, refrigerating it for hours, and then performing the unmolding ritual, which involved warm water, a prayer, and one decisive flip onto a serving plate. When it came out clean, it was triumph. When it stuck and collapsed into a shimmering heap, nobody mentioned it. The recipes got stranger as the decade wore on. Some included olives, some included celery. One popular variation called for tomato soup mixed directly into the gelatin. By the 1980s, the Jell-O salad quietly disappeared from most tables, replaced by nothing, because nothing needed to replace it. Number 15. Tube tops. A cylinder of stretchy fabric held up by nothing but faith and elastic tension. No straps, no sleeves, no structure of any kind. You pulled it on like a bandage and hoped for the best. The tube top was the uniform of summer in the late 1970s. Women wore them to the grocery store, to the county fair, to backyard cookouts where one wrong reach for the potato salad could end the whole arrangement. The fabric rolled down if you raised your arms. It rolled up if you bent over. Adjusting it in public became a reflex, a quick tug every few minutes that everyone pretended not to notice. They came in every color and every pattern, from solid terry cloth to rainbow stripes to a metallic gold that looked like someone had wrapped a chocolate bar around your torso. By the early 1980s, the tube top had been quietly replaced by actual shirts with actual support, and most women were relieved. Number 14. Fondue sets. The fondue pot sat in the center of the dining table on a little stand with a flame underneath, and everyone gathered around it with long forks to dip bread, meat, or fruit into melted cheese or chocolate. That was the idea. The reality was messier. The cheese scorched on the bottom of the pot if you looked away for 2 minutes. The oil for meat fondue spattered across the tablecloth and left grease spots that never came out. Someone always dropped a piece of bread into the pot and spent the next 5 minutes fishing for it with 2 forks while everyone waited. The chocolate version worked better, but by the end of the evening, the pot was a crusted disaster that nobody wanted to clean. Fondue dinner parties were the centerpiece of 1970s entertaining. You invited the neighbors over, dimmed the lights, set out the pot, uncorked a bottle of wine, and spent 2 hours trying to eat a meal that could have been made in 15 minutes on a regular stove. The equipment was not cheap. A full fondue set came with the pot, the stand, the burner, a set of color-coded forks so you could tell whose was whose, and sometimes a lazy Susan to hold the dipping items. Wedding registries listed them. Housewarming gifts included them. Department stores displayed them next to the woks and the electric carving knives. By the late 1970s, nearly every suburban kitchen in America had at least one fondue set tucked in a cabinet. Then the dinner party trend shifted. The pots went into storage, and they stayed there for decades. Open any thrift store in America today, and there is a fondue set on the shelf, probably still in the original box, with the color-coded forks still wrapped in tissue paper. Number 13. Streaking. In 1974, running naked through a public space became a national pastime. College campuses were the epicenter. Students streaked through football stadiums, across graduation stages, and down the main streets of college towns while crowds cheered and campus security stood there trying to figure out what to do. It peaked during the Academy Awards ceremony that year when a man ran across the stage behind the presenter while millions of people watched on live television. The whole thing was treated like harmless fun. Newspapers covered it with a wink. Radio stations played novelty songs about it. Parents shook their heads and turned the page. The fad burned out within months, and by 1975, most people who had done it were already pretending they had not. Number 12. Polyester everything. Polyester was not limited to leisure suits. By the mid-1970s, the fabric had invaded every corner of the American wardrobe. Shirts, dresses, pants, jackets, ties, even bedsheets. The appeal was that it never wrinkled. You could pull a polyester shirt out of the dryer and wear it straight to the office. The problem was that it never breathed either. Wearing polyester on a warm day was like wrapping yourself in a garbage bag. It held on to odors in a way that cotton never did. It generated static electricity strong enough to give you a shock when you touched a doorknob. The colors were loud and the patterns were louder. Big geometric prints in orange, brown, and mustard that seemed designed to be seen from across a parking lot. When the backlash finally came in the early 1980s, cotton staged one of the great comebacks in fabric history. Number 11. Platform shoes. The soles were thick, the heels were thicker. Some platforms added 3 or 4 inches of cork, wood, or rubber under your foot, turning a normal walk into something that looked like you were testing the ground for landmines. Men wore them. Women wore them. Disco floors were full of people teetering on platforms, trying to dance without rolling an ankle. The shoes were heavy, awkward, and produced a distinctive clomping sound on any hard surface that announced your arrival from 2 rooms away. Stairs were a genuine hazard. Twisted ankles were common enough that emergency rooms noticed the trend. Getting into a car meant angling your foot sideways to fit under the steering wheel. The style faded by the end of the decade, replaced by running shoes and sensible flats, and the platforms went into the same closet as the leisure suits. Number 10. Citizens banned radios. For a few years in the mid-1970s, half of America decided to talk to strangers through a 2-way radio mounted on the dashboard of their car. The Citizens Band Radio, or CB, had been around for decades, mostly used by truckers to share road conditions and speed trap locations. Then, around 1975, the whole country caught the fever. Regular commuters installed CB units in their sedans. Families mounted them in station wagons. People picked handles for themselves the way they would later pick screen names on the internet. Smokey and the Bandit came out in 1977 and poured gasoline on the fire. Suddenly, everyone wanted a handle. Everyone wanted to say 10-4, and the airwaves were jammed with people who had nothing useful to say but could not stop talking. The language was half the appeal. Truckers had built an entire slang vocabulary over the years, and civilians adopted it overnight. A police officer was a bear. A speed trap was a bear in the air. The highway was the super slab. Your location was your 20. People who had never driven a truck in their lives were using trucker lingo at the dinner table and annoying everyone around them. CB clubs formed in suburbs. Magazines dedicated to the hobby launched and sold out. Bumper stickers appeared on family cars with handles printed on them. The fad peaked around 1977 and collapsed just as fast. Cell phones were still years away, but the novelty of talking to strangers wore off once people realized that most of the strangers had nothing interesting to say. The radios came out of the dashboards, went into a box in the garage, and stayed there. Number 9. Beanbag chairs. The beanbag was a large vinyl or fabric sack filled with tiny polystyrene pellets. You dropped into it and the pellets shifted around your body, forming a sort of cradle that swallowed you up to your shoulders. Getting out of one was the challenge. You sank so deep that standing up required rolling sideways onto the floor and pushing yourself up from there, which looked ridiculous every single time. The vinyl versions made a loud crunching sound every time you shifted your weight. The pellets escaped through every seam and zipper, scattering across the floor like tiny white insects that clung to your socks. Pets loved attacking them, which meant the fabric was always covered in fur and claw marks. By the 1980s, most beanbags had gone flat, lost half their filling, and sat deflated in a corner of the basement, looking defeated. Number 8. Bell-bottom jeans. Bell-bottoms had been around since the late 1960s, but by the mid-1970s, the flare had reached absurd proportions. The legs widened from the knee down until the fabric dragged on the ground, sweeping up dirt, puddle water, cigarette butts, and anything else on the sidewalk. The hems frayed within weeks. By the end of a month, the bottom 2 inches looked like they had been chewed. The wider the bell, the more fashionable you were, which meant some pairs had openings so wide they looked like denim skirts attached to your ankles. Walking in the rain meant carrying several pounds of soaked fabric on each leg. The style peaked around 1977 and narrowed sharply into the 1980s, when straight-leg jeans and eventually skinny cuts made bell-bottoms look like costumes from another century. Number 7. Custom vans. The custom van was a full-sized cargo van that had been gutted, carpeted, painted, and turned into a rolling living room. The outside featured an airbrushed mural, usually a fantasy scene involving a wizard, a sunset, or a Viking ship, sometimes all three at once. The inside was shag carpet on every surface, including the ceiling and the wheel wells. There were captain's chairs that swiveled, a fold-down bed in the back, a small refrigerator, mood lighting in purple or red, and a stereo system loud enough to rattle the windows of the car behind you at a stoplight. The custom van was personal space on wheels. It was where you went when you wanted to be somewhere that was not your parents' house and not quite anywhere else. Van culture had its own magazines, its own shows, and its own clubs that met on weekends in parking lots. People spent thousands of dollars on modifications and took them seriously. They entered competitions where judges scored the quality of the airbrushing, the creativity of the interior layout, and the overall theme. The names painted on the sides were things like Knight Rider, Free Spirit, and Midnight Express. Some vans had porthole windows, some had chandeliers, a few had fish tanks bolted to the wall. The more ridiculous the build, the more respect it got. The fad peaked in the late 1970s and collapsed almost entirely by 1983, when fuel prices climbed and the rise of the minivan killed the custom van scene overnight. The murals faded in the sun. The shag carpet rotted in the humidity. The vans ended up in driveways, then salvage yards, then nowhere. Today, a well-preserved custom 1970s van sells for serious money at auction. The ones that survived are treated like artifacts from a civilization that briefly existed and then vanished without explanation. Number 6. Lava lamps. The lava lamp was a tall, narrow cylinder filled with colored wax floating in liquid. A light bulb in the base heated the wax, which rose in slow blobs to the top, cooled, and sank back down in a continuous loop. That was the entire function. The lamp gave off almost no usable light. It just sat on your nightstand or your shelf and blobbed hour after hour in complete silence. The appeal was hypnotic. You could watch the wax drift and separate for 20 minutes and not realize you had been staring at a lamp. They came in combinations like red and yellow, blue and green, and purple and orange. The lamps took about an hour to warm up properly, and if you shook one while it was running, the wax broke into tiny pieces that took days to reform into proper blobs. Every teenager in America seemed to want one. Every parent wondered why. Number 5. Roller disco. Somebody looked at a discotheque and said, "What if everyone in here was also on wheels?" By the late 1970s, roller rinks across America had installed mirror balls, strobe lights, and sound systems pumping out the Bee Gees at full volume. You laced up your skates, rolled onto a hardwood floor slick with wax, and tried to look graceful under a spinning light show. The outfits were half the event. Satin shorts, tube socks pulled up to the knee, headbands, and skates with bright-colored wheels and stoppers that glowed under the blacklight. Everyone thought they looked like a movie star. Nobody did. The floor was a disaster of collisions, near misses, and people grabbing the railing with both hands while pretending they meant to stop there. Roller disco peaked with a speed that matched the skating itself. By 1981, most of those rinks had ripped out the disco balls and gone back to regular skating sessions with a hot dog stand and an organist. Number 4. Toga parties. After the movie Animal House came out in 1978, college students across the country started wrapping themselves in bedsheets and calling it a costume. The toga party became the default theme for any gathering that needed an excuse to be louder and messier than usual. You took a white sheet off the bed, draped it over one shoulder, tied it around your waist with a belt or a piece of rope, and showed up holding a plastic cup. That was the entire preparation. The sheets slipped off your shoulder constantly. They dragged on the ground and picked up everything they touched. They got stained within the first hour and never recovered. Nobody looked like a Roman senator. Everyone looked like they had just woken up and grabbed the nearest piece of fabric available. The fad lasted through the early 1980s and then quietly faded, although it still surfaces at certain colleges every fall like a tradition nobody remembers starting. Number 3. Disco fashion. When disco hit the mainstream around 1977, the wardrobe that came with it was spectacular in ways that are difficult to explain to anyone who was not there. Satin shirts unbuttoned to the navel, gold chains layered 3 deep across a bare chest, spandex pants so tight they left nothing to the imagination, sequined halter tops that threw light across the room, white 3-piece suits paired with black shirts and pointed collar tips. The dance floor was the runway, and the goal was to reflect as much light as possible while moving. Women wore wrap dresses and stiletto heels that clicked on the tile. Men wore platform boots and shirts with collars that could pick up radio signals. The whole look was designed to be seen under a mirror ball, and outside that specific lighting it looked completely absurd. Disco fashion did not survive the backlash of 1979. When the music died, the outfits went with it. Number 2. Chia Pets. The Chia Pet arrived in 1977, and it was, at its core, a hollow terracotta figure that you smeared with wet seeds and waited for sprouts to grow into what was supposed to look like fur or hair. The most common shape was a ram. You soaked the seeds overnight, applied them carefully to the grooves on the figure, added water to the base, and set it on the kitchen windowsill. Within a week or two, green sprouts appeared, giving the ram a patchy, slightly sickly-looking coat that grew in uneven clumps. Some spots came in thick. Others stayed bare. The sprouts dried out if you forgot to water them for a single day. The whole thing smelled faintly of wet clay and grass clippings. Millions of them were sold as holiday gifts every year. The jingle played on television constantly. Most Chia Pets ended up browning on that same windowsill until someone finally threw them out in January. Number 1. Wood paneling. It covered the basement. It covered the den. It covered the hallway, the spare bedroom, and sometimes the dining room. Thin sheets of pressed wood with a printed grain pattern nailed or glued directly onto the drywall. The paneling made every room darker, smaller, and about 15 degrees warmer looking. It came in shades ranging from medium brown to very dark brown. Some versions had a glossy finish that reflected light in a way that made the fake grain even more obvious. Builders used it because it was cheap and fast to install. Homeowners accepted it because everyone else had it and nobody questioned it. The grooves between the panels collected dust in thin vertical lines that you could draw a finger through. By the end of the 1970s, wood paneling was in millions of American homes, quietly making basements feel like the inside of a coffin. Tearing it out became a rite of passage for homeowners in the 1980s and 1990s. Behind the panels, you would find the original wall, usually in rough shape, with nail holes, dried glue, and sometimes a different color of paint from a decade nobody remembered. The paneling never fully disappeared from American homes. Some of it is still there right now, in a basement somewhere, waiting. None of it seemed embarrassing at the time. That is the part that gets you. Every fad on this list felt like the right thing to do in the moment. If anything here took you back to your own living room, your own closet, your own parents' kitchen, drop a comment and tell us which one your family fell for. And if you know someone who still has a macrame owl tucked away in the attic, share this with them. Hit subscribe to keep these stories coming.